Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. Here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need in Israel to succeed, whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, flirting, dating, job interviewing, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we'd like to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email, hebrew@nbn.org.il, hebrew@nbn.org.il. You can also write to us if you're joining us live on Zoom in the chat window here on Zoom in the menus bar below or above, depending on how it's configured on your computer. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. The very first entry will be a link to our playlist. We have over 120 videos there, over 18,000 views. Not only can you review all of our previous lessons in the last 50 or so with the spreadsheet vocabulary that we go through, you can also write us a note there. If not thanking us, certainly giving us suggestions as well there. This only works when we hear from you and what topics you'd like us to cover. One last piece of housekeeping, both in the chat today and in emails. Stay tuned for the new registration links for our summer session. The end of spring is definitely here in Israel in terms of the heat, but also our own sessions that we like to break up by seasons here with Nefesh B'Nefesh. So be checking both the chat window here if you're joining us live on Zoom, your email. You can also go to the Israel calendar on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website to get the latest link and registration, both for Monday nights here at Cafe Oleh and our Cafe Oleh conversation group on Wednesday. If you haven't joined us before, I highly encourage you to join. We have the whole range of fluency levels represented there and broken up into smaller groups to be able to practice a lot of the topics we go over in classes like today's. With that, let's get to today's class. So, as I mentioned last week, we're going to talk about an issue that's very difficult for many initial Hebrew speakers or Hebrew learners to understand, much less master. And even other languages that have this aspect to it find Hebrew potentially challenging in that respect. And it's the issue of gender. Hebrew, everything is gendered, whether it's nouns, verbs, adjectives, everything has a gender and everything has to be compatible. And that presents some challenges if you're not used to that in your language, or perhaps you're coming from another Indo-European language, like a Romance language, like French or Spanish, that has gender in nouns, but doesn't really have gender in the same way in verbs. In Hebrew, we conjugate not just first, second, third person. You know, first person is I, second person is you, third person is he or she, and then the plural version. You also have to put in gender. So there's a difference in the present tense, for example, of I write, depending if you're male or female. That presents a lot of challenges in all sorts of levels, both learning that and remembering which is when, where you represent yourself on the gender spectrum for sure is a whole other issue that Hebrew is just starting to address, but we're not focusing on that tonight. Tonight, we're focusing on what are some shortcuts. And when I say shortcuts, these are inherently gender inclusive expressions in everyday Hebrew that will help, especially those at a beginner's level, or especially those having a hard time with the issue of gender, get away from it for a little bit. And when I say expressions, I'm really talking about verbs. So you're already having a hard enough time conjugating verbs and remembering how verbs conjugate. Some of these expressions we're going to go through today take away some of that anxiety. You get, just like we talked about creating new words the other week, and those filler words that you can use when your brain is trying to keep up with your mouth. That's a lot of these. Some helpful ways you can navigate around gender, either because you can't remember how to conjugate and or you don't know who you're speaking to. Let's say you go back to our lesson on automated phone menus the other week. You don't know who the other person on the other line is. You can't tell by their voice. How do you address them until you figure it out? We're going to go through those expressions today. We're not going to address all the different ways gender manifests itself. We're going to have a class in a few weeks in our summer session reviewing conjugations and prepositions and also all of the suffixes that also denote gender. So we're going to get through all that in a little bit, and I'm certainly not going to address, at least tonight, the issue of numbers. Numbers always trips people up when they're learning Hebrew because there's gender too in numbers, and you have to remember which way to do it. Is it flipping the gender? Is it the same gender? What do I do here? Don't worry about that tonight. Tonight, I'm taking it easy on you. You're going to learn gender-free and gender-inclusive expressions to get you through everyday Hebrew. So with that, let me open up today's spreadsheet. As always, you are welcome to screenshot, old school pen and paper, or just wait for the recording, which will also include a PDF of this spreadsheet, which will come in the next day or so. If you have questions as I'm going, please write them in the Q&A. If you're joining us live on Zoom, anything in the chat, I won't be looking at until for another day or so, but Q&A will be for tonight's lesson only. Top of the hour, I'll stop in advance for any questions, and I'll tell you about next week's class. Okay, so first off, the word gender in Hebrew is migdal. Migdal comes from the same root as the word gedel, a fence. Things to lehagdil, to categorize something or someone, right? So it has to do with categorizing, with a category of people or things. In this case, migdal, gender. In modern Hebrew, there are other genders. And again, that's not the point of tonight's class. We're going to talk about gender-free and gender-inclusive expressions, but just know that the Hebrew language is comprised of zachar and nekeva. Zachar gets translated into English as both male and masculine, because when we talk about words, when we say them in Hebrew, we say, haim ze zachar or nekeva. Right? Is it male or is it female? Is it masculine or feminine is the way we would say it in English. And nekeva, female or feminine. Okay. A lot of these expressions, and you know that I love grammar, but I'm also wary of teaching a lot of grammar because I know how nervous or anxious it makes people. But I do need to teach you this one important grammatical term because it makes all of these expressions make sense, which is the term shem hapoal. Shem hapoal in Hebrew is a lot easier to understand than its English version. The English version is the infinitive verb or the infinitive tense. What does that mean? It's simply the word to, T-O, followed by the verb. To do, to be, to cook, to run, to enjoy, to cry. All of those are examples in English of infinitive verbs. Infinitive, think of the word infinity. They are not conjugated, and thus they are not bound by time or space. We don't know any specifics because the verb is not conjugated. It's infinitive. It's timeless. It's seamless. It doesn't have a break because we're not conjugating for myself or yourself or that person or these people in this time frame or yesterday or in 2 days from now. None of that exists. It's just the verb itself, to do, to be, so forth. Okay. In Hebrew, that's called shem hapoal, literally the name of the verb. Much easier in Hebrew, I agree, than infinitive verb. Okay. A lot of these expressions, like I said, are going to use the infinitive verb. Let's start with a couple. These expressions, this next category, this first category rather, as you see here, is 100% gender-free. Okay, there's no gender involved. There is no conjugation whatsoever. Okay, let me move this up a bit so you can see. There we go. Okay. Yesh plus shem hapoal. Okay, each of these is going to have an example sentence. So don't worry if you don't get it. You'll understand by the illustration. Okay, yesh, many of us have already learned this word in Hebrew, right? In our formal lessons, other lessons elsewhere, maybe with us, right? Yesh normally means there is. Okay, this doesn't translate there is plus to do something. It translates to one can or one should, or one must when you combine yesh plus the infinitive verb. So, for example, yesh lishtot harbe mayim b'kietz. Okay, yesh lishtot harbe mayim b'kietz. This translates to in English, one must or one should drink a lot of water in the summer. Yesh lishtot. Lishtot is the verb for to drink in Hebrew. Okay, let's do it each of these. Lishtot is to drink. Harbe, harbe, however you say the letter resh, means many or a lot. Maim, water. Bakaitz, in the summer. Put this all together, yesh lishtot, one, as in a general sense, a person, totally undescriptive, right? We don't know who it is, what they look like, anything about them. One must drink a lot of water in the summer. Okay, yesh plus the infinitive verb, shema poal, creates one must or one should. Totally gender free. You can say this in a general declarative sense. And all sorts of sentences are like this. By the way, as I wrote here, it's a little hard to see. This is one of the many forms that commands in Hebrew take. We're going to do a class on command forms in a few weeks from now, and you're going to see this again. So it's also good review. We've done this class before. We're going to do it again in a little bit, right? Yesh plus shema poal. You're going to see this everywhere. You're going to hear this everywhere. Signage on buses and trains and offices and registrations online for various things. They're all going to say yesh plus shema poal because it's meant to be gender free and gender inclusive. Everyone's included in this. In yesh lemale tofes, one must fill out this form. A classic, right? You're going to see this form again and again. The opposite of yesh plus shema poal is just like in everyday Hebrew. The opposite of yesh is ein. If yesh is there is, ein is there is not. So ein plus shema poal, ein plus the infinitive verb means one cannot, one must not, one should not. Ein lehikanes lamaim lelo hashgachat metzil. It's summertime. If you haven't heard this sentence yet, you need to get yourself to a beach. Whether you like the beach or not, we got the beach. You might as well enjoy it. Ein lehikanes lamaim lelo hashgachat metzil, or to a swimming pool. One cannot or one must not enter the water. Ein lehikanes, lehikanes is to enter, right? Is the infinitive verb for to enter. Lamaim, into the water. Lilo, without. Hashgachat metzil. Hashgacha is supervision. Metzil is a lifeguard. One must not enter the water without lifeguard supervision. En lehikanes lamaim lelo hashgachat metzil. Okay, both of these are great examples of words of sentences you're going to hear all the time, if not read all the time, on signs across the country, and it's using a gender-free structure. En yesh lishtot, en lehikanes, any verb will fit into these. Okay, and you can make myriad of sentences with them. Let's look at some other examples. Our favorite word here at Cafe Oleh shows up again when we're talking about gender-free expressions, efshar. Efshar, when used correctly, is 100% gender-free. Efshar plus our shema poal, the infinitive verb, means one may do something. And this can be both a comment or a question. For example, look at this interchange between two people. אפשר לעזור לי? כן. איך אפשר לעזור? Two lines between two people and absolutely no gender was involved. No conjugation was involved, equally important. You didn't have to sit there and rack your brains how to conjugate the verb לעזור, to help. So instead, you have אפשר לעזור לי? Could you help me? One says in looking in the direction of a clerk or someone who works in a store or wherever you're asking for help. And then the reply, ken, yes. איך אפשר לעזור? How may I help you? The you being, again, as you see in English, assumed in the Hebrew. Okay, but 2 lines of dialogue, no gender involved. By the way, this is a preview for those of you who are joining us for Wednesday's Cafe Oleh conversations. We're going to be practicing and creating new sentences with all of these expressions, and the contest is going to be how long you can go without conjugating a verb. Okay, here's another example. Efshar plus the infinitive, one may do something, or one could, or one would. In this case, efshar la'zor li, could you help me, or would you help me? Remember in Hebrew, we've talked about this before, can and may are the same thing. Ken, ech efshar la'zor. Yes, how may I help you? Okay. 2 other words that the exact same structure, something plus the infinitive. You're going to see this again and again. It helps you out a lot. There are other expressions I didn't include here, but this is a pattern you need to start recognizing. Patterns are always going to be key in understanding Hebrew, much less any language. Asur and mutar, just like we had before, yesh and ein, there is and there isn't, one may not. Same thing here. Asur or asur means forbidden, and mutar, allowed or permitted. They're opposites. So you can do the same thing here. And again, those of you who join us on Wednesday, you're going to make sentences out of these. Asur likanes lamayim. It is forbidden to go into the water. Mutar likanes lamayim po. It's permitted to come into the water, to go into the water at this spot. Okay? With all sorts of things you put here. Asur lechol. Asur lechol ba'autobus. It's forbidden to eat in this bus. Mutar lechol ba'autobus. Right? It's permitted, right? The it's is non-descriptive. It's neither male nor female. It's neither singular nor plural. Therefore, it's gender-free. It's as much gender-inclusive as it is gender-free. Okay? Another construct that has no gender whatsoever is first-person plural. First-person plural is simply we. W-E in English. In Hebrew, anachnu. Think about when you use anachnu. Anachnu, when you conjugate for anachnu, it is, with few exceptions, unless you're talking about an entire group of only females, it's going to be gender inclusive. And specifically, when you use it in the past tense or in the future tense, if you don't know those tenses yet, don't worry, folks. I gave you 2 great expressions here. When you conjugate for anachnu, for we, in the past tense or the future tense, there is no distinction between male or female. You could be an all group of men, all group of women. You could be a mixed gender group. It doesn't matter. There is no difference in conjugation. So for example, the expression in Hebrew, zaznu. If you are at a table with a whole bunch of friends, or perhaps not friends, but you've settled the bill, you've stopped eating, someone puts their hands, both hands on the table right in front of them, doesn't slam their hands, but gently puts it on so it makes noise, and they go, yalla, zaznu, means we're done, let's go. In American quasi-English, vemus, right? All of these terms, zaznu, hayinu, halachnu, all these terms are saying we've been there, right? Zaznu comes from the verb lazuz, to move. So if you say zaznu, it means we've already gone. Let's move it. Vamos, vamos. All those different terms to say we as a group are already on the move. Hayinu, literally we were, meaning we're leaving this place. We've just left. We're on our way. All these terms, when you conjugate for first person plural past tense, it's gender inclusive because there is no gender involved. Zaznu. Conversely, the future tense, let's do something. A very common expression, not just in English, but certainly in Hebrew. Let's go to the beach. Let's talk tomorrow. Or as the sample sentence I'm going to do in a second, let's talk afterwards, okay? Anything like that is going to be bo. Bo is the command form plural of the verb lavo. Come, let's, right? It's the come part, C-O-M-E, to come. And ne. Ne is the beginning of any conjugation in the future tense, first person plural, right? Nidaber, we will speak. Nipagesh, we will meet. All sorts of verbs, right? The conjugation in the future tense begins with the letter nun. So, bo nidaber achar kach, okay? A very common sentence in any language. Let's talk afterwards, okay? There's no gender involved here because it's the two of us, or maybe it's a group of people. But the point is, I don't know who the composition of the group includes. It could be 2 people, it could be 10 people, it could be all men, all women, it could be mixed. The point though is, bo nidaber achar kach, okay, is not only a complete sentence, and it's a very good sentence, there is no gender involved. This is gender-free Hebrew. Okay, so already you have 2 different constructions on how to make Hebrew gender-free. One is using a variety of words before the infinitive verb, shem hapoal, yesh, en, efshar, asur, mutar, among others, or the first person plural future tense. Anachnu ninaseh, we will do something. Anachnu nidaber, we will speak, which on its own is gender-free. And then we can do bo ne. This is the same thing in Hebrew, all the different languages, right? In Spanish, vamos a la playa. Let's go to the beach. Right? Same thing here. Bo nidaber machar, or bo nidaber achar kach, okay? Let's talk afterwards, okay? Let's get to another category of terms. These are gender-free in meaning, but they're still technically gendered. And this has a lot to do in the present tense. Present tense in Hebrew, again, if you are learning, if you know a language that has gender in it, present tense in Hebrew makes it a little bit more complicated because let's say it's the verb, for example, here. The verb for to say is lomar. In the present tense, ani omer, I say, ata omer, you masculine say, at omeret, you female say, hu omer, he omeret, and so forth. Okay, so you even have to genderize, you have to put gender in the present tense, whether you're speaking to a male or a female, or they're speaking. Okay. When we conjugate, however, in the plural, even though in the plural in Hebrew there's anachnu omrim, atem omrim, you plural say, aten omrot, you plural female only say, hem omrim, they say, hen omrot, they say feminine. Okay, even though there is gender in the plural tense, we use the plural in the present tense to mean a gender inclusive group, gender-free group, therefore. So for example, you've probably heard this before. This is the way you ask, how do you say a word in Hebrew? You don't say like in English, how do you say blah, 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 right? We've already conjugated the verb to say. How do you, or even a group of you say? Instead in Hebrew, ech omrim blank. Ech omrim skyscraper. Ech omrim popsicle. Ech omrim data processor. Whatever the word is you're looking for in Hebrew, this is how you ask how to say it in Hebrew. Ech omrim. How? Ech omrim. Omrim is conjugated present tense plural in a general sense. How do they say? How do you say? How do we say? The point, though, is it's a general group of people. In a general pool of people, how does one say blah, blah, blah? Okay? No gender involved. Even though omrim is technically conjugated for gender, it's still gender inclusive in the sense of its meaning. Okay. Let's look at another example of this. Ech korim le. How does one call something? This is another way that you can not only find out how you call something in Hebrew, the name of it in Hebrew, but also find out someone's name. Ech korim lazeh. Ech korim laben adam hazeh. Right? Even though ze, this is technically gendered. איך קוראים itself is not gendered. How does one call blank? Okay. Another one, a great one, because if you haven't caught up, Israelis are full of opinions, and sometimes they like to base those opinions on what they perceive to be the larger consensus, or they project, perhaps, there is a larger consensus that they happen to be the voice of. However it may be, אומרים ש. אומרים ש... אומרים שתהיה עוד מלחמה בכמה שבועות. They say there will be another war in a few weeks. Right? Who is this omrim? Who are they say that? Who are these people they that's being spoken of in terms of omrim? We don't know. The point though is it could be 2 people, it could be 10 people, it could be mixed gendered, it could even be single gendered. In modern Hebrew, this is how we make the statement, they say that, or one says that, right? This could also be the one, that proverbial one that we talked about before. One says that, right? And then it's a cliche or an expression of some sort. But the point, though, is all of these are examples where we conjugate the verb primarily in the present tense to speak in a general setting. Let's look at some more examples. Now we're getting into 2 examples coming up of one of my favorite parts of speech, and I know one of yours, the participle. Because the participle comes up again and again and again in modern Hebrew as a noun, as an adjective, and as a verb. In this case, the past participle is amurim. Amur, in Hebrew, amur, amura, amurim, amurot, means supposed to. S-U-P-P-O-S-E-D, supposed to. Okay? אמורים לפתוח את החנות מחדש, לא? אמורים לפתוח את החנות מחדש, לא? They are supposed to, אמורים, לפתוח, to open, את החנות, the store, מחדש, anew, or from scratch, לא? Right? Okay? They're supposed to open the store anew, right? Who is the amurim? Who are the they? Is it one owner? Is it multiple owners? Is it a specific clerk? Is it the landlord? We don't know. Amurim is, again, we use these expressions not just to be inclusive, but also when we don't know. We don't know who we're talking about. We don't have a specific subject in mind other than this ambiguous, nebulous they. There's someone involved, right? In this case, we use the past participle, amur, supposed to. They're supposed to open the store anew, right? You don't know who they is. And frankly, in the everyday use of this store or going by it, we don't have to know who it is. But we know that the store has been closed. We know that the store is supposed to be open. We're excited for it to open. They have something that we need there. And so you see someone else on the street, and there may or may not be a sign in the store window, and you ask them, "Amurim liftoach את החנות מחדש, לא?" They're supposed to open the store anew, right? A very useful way to talk in general about things, because Israelis love to talk in general, generalizing. We do that in other languages, by the way, too, in other societies, but this is the way to do it in Hebrew that also happens to be gender-free and gender-inclusive. Okay. Again, this is an example that is technically conjugated for gender, but it's still meant to be understood. It is understood to be gender inclusive. Anytime you've called a phone menu, and we talked about that a few weeks ago, this is the line you're going to get when you finally get to the option to get to a natzig shirut, to a customer rep. You're going to get the line, "Inchem muavarim natzig shirut." You've probably heard that 1,000 times if you've already been living in Israel. I can't do the right voice. It's either apropos gender, a male or a woman, a man or a woman's voice. "Inchem muavarim natzig shirut." Right? You've heard it in that sing-song way, right? Hinchem. Hinchem is the combination of the word hine, here, and the possessive suffix for you, plural. hinchem. So hinchem is a conjugation, yes. But again, it's gender inclusive. And you can understand hinchem as you are hereby. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Hinchem. Okay. We're going to talk about conjunctions and prepositions and suffixes in a few weeks from now, and we're going to go over this word because you're going to hear it a lot. This is where the term hineni comes from, right? Here I am. Hincha, here you are, or you are hereby. Hinech, heno, hena, hinenu, hinchem, hinchem, and so forth. Okay, in this case, hinchem mu'avarim lenatzig shirut. Mu'avar, in this case, mu'avarim, is again a past participle of the verb leha'avir, to transfer. You are hereby being transferred. Remember, this is past participle, ed. You are being transferred lenetzig shirut, to a customer representative. Okay, but again, this is meant to be gender inclusive. Hinchem mu'avarim lenetzig shirut. Yes, you will see and hear more and more trying to be gender inclusive by saying hinchem, hinchen, mu'avarim, mu'avarot. But in modern Hebrew, it is understood to be gender inclusive simply by saying hinchem mu'avarim, because you're talking about a group of people. You don't know who the group of people consists of. Okay? Hinchem mu'avarim. You are hereby being transferred to a netzig shirut. The alternative, by the way, is conjugating for a specific gender. It would either have to be hincha mu'avar, you singular masculine are being transferred, or hinech mu'averet, you single female transferred. And when we're talking about automated phone menus, it's not that automated. It's not that customized. It's one single message for everyone. Hinchem mu'avarim. You are all being transferred to a customer representative regardless of your identity, or in spite of, or inclusive of your identity. And on the same lines of using the word hinchem, hinchem mitbakshim leizaher bizman atzirat harakevet. I took this one. Both of these are actual things you are going to hear if you step out of your home here in Israel right after this class, or if you leave class early today. Call any automated phone menu on your phone. You're going to hear that line. Promise. Go on the train, Rakevet Israel, Israel Railways, anywhere in Israel. As the train approaches the station, it's going to say, automated announcement, Hinchem mitbakshim leizaher bizman atzirat harakevet. You are requested. Mitbakshim is the present participle of the verb lehitbakesh, to become requested. You are being requested. You are requested. Lehizaher. Lehizaher, to use caution, to take care, to be forewarned. Bizman, at the time of what? Atzirat harakevet. The atzira, the act of stopping of harakevet, the train. Hinchem mitbakshim leizaher bizman atzirat harakevet. These two last examples, are not, you're not going to necessarily speak them every day, but you're going to hear them and read them all the time. And as I always say in our classes, language is not just about what comes out of your mouth. It's also what you hear and what you read. And if you're that focused on everything that comes out of your mouth, you're only getting a very small percentage of how to use any language, let alone Hebrew. You need to be able to also listen and read. And these are two great examples you're going to see all the time. You're going to hear. You are never going to say, unless you are an actual caller or a teller on the other side of a phone, you're never going to say this out loud. Just like you are never going to say to anyone, but you got to understand what that means for sure. Just because you're not going to say it doesn't mean you're not going to hear it and use it. These are just some of the examples that are out there for gender-free expressions and gender-inclusive expressions that, whether you are looking for a way to be inclusive, whether you are having a hard time conjugating verbs, or you just want to give your brain a break and you don't want to conjugate or do declensions of verbs for a little bit, these are some great examples of how to get through everyday verbs without thinking too hard and not having to think about gender at the same time. I'm going to pause here for questions because I see we have a few in the Q&A. This is your chance as well. If you have questions about this or anything Hebrew related, remotely related to this, to please write in the Q&A now so I can answer them. And then towards the end of the class, I will tell you about next week's class, which is one of my favorite topics. Not that they all aren't. Okay, some questions. So in Hebrew, excuse me, the gender of a word is called differently from the gender of a person, mean. That's a great question. Mean, mem yud nun sofi, means sex. Not sex, sex as in gender. What sex do you go by? Migdal is a much more comprehensive term. Yes, you can say mean with regards to a word, but migdal is a better term because it really does mean gender. It doesn't mean sex because words don't have sex, they have gender. That's the difference, I would say. What about tzarich rather than yesh? You can absolutely, actually you can't. Why can't you say tzarich? Someone asked, can you say tzarich instead of yesh? You actually can't. You would have to conjugate tzarich. Tzarich, yes, there are people who say tzarich lishtot harbe mayim b'kayitz. That is technically incorrect in Hebrew. You'll hear it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but the proper way to say it is yesh lishtot harbe mayim b'kayitz. Why? Tzarich needs to be conjugated. Tzarich, tzricha, tzrichim, tzrichot. So you would have to be more specific. If you want to be super general, just like yesh lishtot harbe mayim b'kayitz is, that applies to everyone, regardless of gender, regardless of how many of us there are. Tzarich lishtot harbe mayim b'kayitz is not directed at one person. Yes, each and every one of us needs to do so. But unless you're having a conversation that you're specifically speaking to one person who happens to be male, tzarich is appropriate. Otherwise, it's not. You have to say yesh. Great question. That's a really important one. Great idea there, but tzarich does need to be conjugated. Lo leikanes lamayim is not a, so someone wrote, is it possible to say lo leikanes lamayim? No, that's incorrect Hebrew, because again, this is a command. You're translating from the English, do not go into the water, which makes total sense in English. It does not make sense in Hebrew. Why? Because in English, we've done away with a lot of the various tenses we have in other languages. For example, the imperative tense, the command tense. Do not go into the water. The do and not go all form a construct that we call the imperative. In Hebrew, we have to actually conjugate. So in this case, instead of conjugating, we can say ein leikanes lamayim. It is clear this is a directive. This is an imperative order. Do not go in the water. You can't say, in Hebrew, we can't translate from the English, lo leikanes lamayim. That's also an incomplete sentence in Hebrew. Okay, hope that made sense. Next question, sorry. I tried using Modal plus Shema Poal. It seemed people did not think this was effective in communication. Again, remember what I talked about just now with those sample sentences. You're not always going to be using these terms. A lot of times you're going to be hearing these words. Asur likanes lamayim. You're going to see this. You're not going to say this necessarily, unless you are a lifeguard or you work for a local municipality. You're going to see these terms as much as they're going to use them. Not everything we teach here is meant to come out of your mouth. Sometimes it's meant to go into your ears or into your eyes. Shem HaPoal is infinitive. Poel is a worker. Okay, great question. We use, when we talk about grammar, all the time in grammar, we're going to use some iteration of the shoresh, the three letters, pei, ein, lamed. In that order, they have to do with to do. Poal is a verb. Oel is a worker. Lif'ol is to work or to operate. Let me write these all down so you can see them, because this is important. Lif'ol, sorry, just 1 second. There we go. Okay. The verb lif'ol is to act. Okay. From this, we get other verbs. One of the ones you're going to hear a lot in Hebrew is lehaf'il, which is to operate. Okay. Lehaf'il. From the same root, right? All of these are pei, ayin, lamed. All of them, right? So if I pull that down, all of these. A poel is a worker. Poel. Come on, there we go. Poal, spelled the exact same way in Hebrew and pronounced differently, is a verb. Poal, right? They're all coming from the same root, meaning some sort of action. This is the same root that we use, by the way, for all the binyanim, all the different forms that verbs take in Hebrew. Pa'al, pi'el, pu'al, hitpa'el. You're hearing the same thing again and again because they all come from the root, shoresh, from which we get to act, and of course the word a verb. Okay, great question. Stop share, Q&A. Is amurim supposed to coming from amar to say? Absolutely it is. It is technically the past participle of the verb to say. Think about how this literally gets translated. They have said it is to open, that the store is supposed to open from anew, right? Supposed to is it is said to. It is said to open. They are said to open the store anew, right? Supposed to, yes, it comes from the same root, aleph, mem, resh, that we get the verb to say. It is said, it is supposed to, is the connection in Hebrew. My Ulpan teacher said that when you ask a question asking who is doing something or has done something, you always use the masculine gender in your verb. Is that true? I would need a specific example. That's a little too abstract for me to think about. But these examples here, yes, there are people who will say it's conjugated for male and mixed gender, but the understanding is that it's gender inclusive. אמור להגיע את האוטובוס ברחוב הזה, אמור להגיע, האוטובוס אמור, someone is trying to ask, is the bus supposed to arrive on this street? Or is that bus supposed to arrive on the street? אמור להגיע, yes, אמור, on its own, אמור does conjugate, אמור, אמורה, אמורים, אמורות, right? So if you're talking about a bus, you're not talking about gender inclusive, gender free or gender inclusive anymore. The moment you talk about a specific thing, you have to conjugate. We're not talking about a specific thing in this. They are supposed to open the store. They are supposed to arrive at 6. Hem amurim lagia b'shesh. Who is hem? We don't know. Okay, that's the point. That's why we can be gender free here, because we don't have enough information to specify who's they. Autobus is a masculine noun. Therefore, it has to be conjugated as amor. Let me write this out so you see the difference. Above. האוטובוס אמור להגיע. האוטובוס אמור להגיע ברחוב הזה. נכון? ברחוב הזה. נכון? The bus is supposed to arrive on the street, correct? Look at the difference between this sentence and that sentence. אמורים לפתוח את החנות מחדש, לא? There is no subject. The subject is part of amurim. We don't know who it includes and doesn't include. Whereas here, the subject is autobus, Not only do we know the subject, but we know its gender. Autobus is masculine, therefore it's amur. Great question. This is not the same thing. Hope that answered your question. Hi, you said lelo in the example tonight. When is this different to ain? We get this question all the time. I promise you folks, we're gonna get to another round of synonyms, and lelo is a great word. Lelo means without. It's a synonym to the word bli. It is not ain in this context. Ain means there isn't, versus lelo is without. Just like in English, there's a difference between there is not, and without. They are two different parts of speech. What about al? Great question. Again, this is about gender-free expressions. We're going to talk about commands in a few weeks, and you're going to use, when you want to say something negatively, don't do something, you're going to use the article al, followed by a conjugated form of the verb. Great question, but that is a gendered expression. If I just agreed with someone that I will be the one to contact him, can I still say niye bekesher, which technically goes against this, or it is just a phrase and not taken too technically? I love this question. I actually just taught someone privately today, and we went over the expression niye bekesher, we will be in touch, versus eye bekesher, I will be in touch, or tie bekesher, you be in touch with me. When you say niye bekesher, it's like we'll be in touch. It's the literal translation of we'll be in touch. So if I just agreed with someone that I will be the one to contact him, can I still say we will be in touch? You can absolutely say this, right? Because you will be in touch. If you agreed to be in contact with someone, yes, just like in English. Great, we'll be in touch. You can also say in Hebrew, Ehyeh b'kesher, I will be in touch. Either one is fine. But niye b'kesher absolutely is all right. We will be in touch, as in we will be in touch. I may be the one calling you and you're the one answering the phone, but we will literally be in touch. Great question. Is it correct to say amurim she? No, amurim means supposed to. So you can say, for example, no, it's omrim she. They say that. If you want to use amurim, it always is followed by in this context, it's followed by an infinitive verb. Amurim להגיע בעוד כחצי שעה. They're supposed to arrive in about a half hour. אמורים להגיש את העבודה הנדרשת היום. They are supposed to present the requested work today. Okay, but אומרים שירד גשם מחר. They say that it'll rain tomorrow. That's how the difference. They're supposed to versus they say that. Two different things, but using the same root. Aleph mem resh. Great question. In English, I can mix one and them. For example, helping one with Hebrew, helping them helps them to speak alone. Great question, right? In English, this is really interesting because we don't use the word one a lot, except in very formal English, right? But we use they as a gender inclusive term in English, or them being the object, they is the subject. So we use that a lot. It's the same thing in English, right? In Hebrew. Omrim she, or ech korim, or ech omrim, or all these other things. Yes, one versus they, it can be interchanged when appropriate. Absolutely. As long as it's understood that there is no specificity of who we're talking about and how many people we're talking about, much less their gender. It can be one, it could be they. I said one only because that's more the literal meaning of these terms. But yes, as you see in these examples, it really is they. How do they say, right? Is as much of a appropriate and correct translation as how does one say? How do they, you, we say? right? Because omrim in the present tense is all of those things. Anachnu omrim, atem omrim, hem omrim, right? Uses the same conjugation for we, you, and they. So yes, you can either say they, you can say one, it means the exact same thing. Great question. Okay, Q&A. Does Nefesh B'Nefesh have any Ulpan workbooks that people could purchase for practice? No, that's a wonderful idea. We created this series about 7 years ago, in person and now online, to supplement what already exists between Ulpanim and other means of formal education. This has always been seen as a supplement. And yet we have a huge repository of all of our previous lessons on YouTube. Another shout out for our YouTube channel. Always check it out. We have lots of ideas for growing and expanding Cafe Oleh and all sorts of things. But for now, these are the workbook that we have, or all the spreadsheets of vocabulary that we have in the past. Okay. Last question for now, and then I'll talk about next week's class. How about dating? One speaks little Hebrew, the other no English, sparks fly. Happens all the time in Israel. Miracles happen. Okay, with that, Toda Rabba, thank you all for joining. Some important announcements. First off, again, all of our previous lessons are up on YouTube. This lesson will be recorded and uploaded in the next day or so, so check your email as well as the website itself. You can also click the subscribe button on YouTube so you know when the next one shows up. Number one. Number two, our Wednesday conversation, Cafe Oleh conversation classes continue this week. We're going to be practicing these expressions that you learned tonight and actually plugging them into everyday life. And you're going to be challenged to use as many of them as possible without starting to conjugate verbs. So for those of you at all levels, particularly at beginners levels, this is your class to get a break from conjugating. Or if you're just looking for new vocabulary, join us. Absolutely free. Sign up is on our website, as well as it should be in the chat box here. Next week, we are going to be talking about everyday slang, the latest slang, and everyday expressions. Some really important parts of understanding how a language works is how it evolves and what new words it comes up with. And this period in Israel's history, in Jewish history, in the history of the Hebrew language is not for lack of new terms. Just like Corona gave us new terms or new familiarity with old Hebrew words, so too has the past 8 months. From everything of how do you answer someone who asks how you're doing, there are new ways to answer that in the last 8 months, to expressions that we use all the time that you can't just look up in a dictionary. And chances are, if you're going through a formal ulpan, they won't teach you so early because they're slang, right? Slang often goes against the rules of grammar and syntax. I'm going to teach you a bunch of those next week. Really give you some street cred, as we say, or I think the newest word is riz. Don't make me say that word again. That really dates me by saying that. But in the meantime, Toda Rabba, thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you all in our next few classes. Take care. Lehitraot.